And so Charles has come up here several times. He's an instructor in Colorado, and he's not one to just keep the students in the classroom, but to go out into the field. And they regularly come up here, and you don't just learn about it from the books, but you come up here and see the sites. And so I don't want to talk too much more about him and let him do the talking. So let's welcome Charles Wilkinson. Thank you. I'll get you some.
Well, good afternoon. It's great to see you here, a number of old friends, very dear friends, and been making new ones as the day's gone on. I've enjoyed very much. I came over for the morning session here at the Reservation-Based program and really enjoyed that, and thank the students and the faculty members for what you are doing. I will say, I've been to the Longhouse. This is my 5th time. And for me, from what I know, and I don't pretend to know about all U.S. universities and colleges, but I will say that to my knowledge of all the higher education institutions in this country, this place right here is where a person can feel the spirit of native sovereignty and culture more than anywhere else. And thank you for doing this and making it what it has become. Didn't have to happen that way, one needs to add. Back in the mid-'80s, setting up a reservation-based program and building a longhouse, particularly of this magnitude, well, it wasn't undertaken by any other university or college. And I can just imagine, and I'm one who loves higher education, as most of you do. It has its problems, but it's a great institution. Still, in most universities, people would grumble and say, well, does this mean that we're going to have to build a Catholic church on campus out of state money? Reservation-based? There are reservations all over the state. We're going to have to study this very carefully for maybe 2 decades. But Evergreen did go ahead with it, with both, and it speaks so well for this remarkable institution that many of us far beyond Washington admire so much. I'm in one of the joys of my life, writing a comprehensive history of the Bolt decision, which, and I'll try to communicate a bit of this, is a very broad book because you have to go way back to early Aboriginal times to understand the Bolt decision, and you have to bring it right up to February 2015 to realize all of its impacts, or maybe a beginning part of its impacts. We all call it the Bolt decision, but it really isn't that. Yes, Judge Bolt was courageous. He was a great judge. He handed down one of the most luminous opinions ever rendered in American law, but he did not write it. Indian people wrote it. And it was three groups of Indian people. First, the people starting basically in the mid-60s who brought the case before him. And there are so many people here who I consider leaders, but I think you'll appreciate it if I do single out one and say that the genius, and there's no other word for him, of Hank Adams was right at the heart of it, of bringing the Boldt decision to trial and winning the case. And another person, and I have to thank Willie and Pegan so much for coming today, obviously was Billy Frank Jr. And it was so hard a year and a half ago. We thought we'd be worrying about Billy passing on when he reached his dad's age of 104. And nobody saw it coming. And it's been hard to have lost him. But you know, I think most of us now understand that he's still here in this air, in this room, and across the Northwest are his jokes and folksiness and his demand that we're running out of time. We gotta save the salmon. Because a movement needs both exuberance, which Billy gave us, and it needs insistence and courage, which Billy gave us. And he's in the air now. He really, truly is. We know what he wants us to do. And he's in the air. He's going to be in the air then. And he's going to be in the air as long as there is a Pacific Northwest. Another group of people, a very large one, the largest of all, is the indigenous people who came here near the beginning of time and stayed for so long and developed institutions that became part of the Boldt decision. And the third group is the people who negotiated the treaties. And so here is how I think of what happened. They had nothing. They had nothing. They had nothing. In my interviews of people for the Boldt decision, 3 different people used exactly the same 3 words in describing the state of Indian people in the Pacific Northwest as of the 1960s. Look, we've got employment problems on the reservations today. Back then, it was conservatively 60% unemployment. The highest it ever was in the Great Depression was 25%. It was 60. That's real conservative. There weren't paved roads. There wasn't indoor plumbing. There weren't people going to college. Young people, older people. The health problems were horrible, and on and on. And to top it off, they were facing termination. As the official policy of the United States of America, and when Congress adopted it, it meant it. Terminate the reservations, terminate the treaties, terminate all the special programs to Indian people, and do it as quickly as possible. That's what it was like. They had nothing. Well, that wasn't literally true, was it? Because they had the culture, the luminous culture, and it had been battered by the majority society, but it was still in place. And they had the determination. And that didn't seem like much at first, but they made it into something. Flashback to thousands of years ago. Oh, we all know how misunderstood the societies of those times were. And I've had law students literally cry, Indian law students cry in class over reading legal documents, congressional hearings, talking about primitive and uncivilized and pagan people. We know how wrong that was. Well, look first of all at the economy that existed here before white people came. It was an elaborate, effective, far-flung economy. It was based on salmon and other marine resources, to some extent elk meat, and to some extent cultural products, blankets, baskets, shawls, other. And the trade, didn't it, reached hundreds of miles up into Canada, all the way down to the Columbia River and up to Celilo Falls. Last spring, Philip Martin of Quinault, who wanted to be here today but wasn't feeling well and couldn't make it. He would be here if he could possibly have been. And Philip explained how, as a young boy, they took trading stuff and went up the Columbia River to Celilo. And it went to the crest of the Cascades and beyond, to the east. And it was large trade. It wasn't small-scale stuff. It was serious, coordinated trade over that region. And the ways of taking fish, one of the most elaborate and effective were the Lummi reef nets, where they could create, through slanting the nets down below, a sense of a rising bottom of a reef, and then pull the nets up and take thousands of fish a day. One said over 10,000, one estimate. Extremely efficient. What about macaw whaling? Ability to go way offshore and bring back the great animals. Oh, the work that took. Think about it. And then all across the region, the netting of salmon and the taking of other animals. So the societies were elaborate, and the idea of being primitive or pagan, oh boy. What can you say about people who are family-oriented, spiritual? No question about it. They were then, they are today. And so that's the people who built up the Northwest. We talk about people settling the Northwest. Oh, they'd already settled it, already built it up. But the non-Indians, my people, just couldn't let it sit. Farming was a better way, the Jeffersonian ideal. It's primitive to be living off salmon. Even though all the new people came in and traded and sometimes paid Indian people to catch the delicacy for them themselves and pass it on to the white people. So, and the thing the white people actually had that was, quote, superior was instruments made from metals that, whether they were rifles or swords or other instruments, including soon tractors and railroads, overwhelmed the tribes. But it wasn't a superior society overwhelming another society, an uncivilized and pagan society. It was a society superior ultimately in numbers and in machines, overriding a culture that deserved much better. But they were forced to the treaty table, to 5 treaty conventions, starting with Nisqually. And we all know, don't we, that it's not going to be long before that treaty tree is going to go back up in the Billy Frank Jr. National Wildlife Refuge. And that's where the first treaty was, right around Christmas to 1854, and continued with Quinault into 56. And the tribal people were every bit as smart as the white people. They understood the future as well as the white people. They knew that militarily, in time, not at that time, the United States at that time had a bare edge militarily. The real edge they had was the knowledge that they could quickly bring people up from San Francisco and from back east. The United States didn't want to have to do that, didn't want to have to go through battles and all those expenditures, and they wanted those treaties and were willing to give up stuff. The tribal people were articulate and firm. We want to keep fishing the way we always have. And so, as you know, the treaties ended up with reservations way too small, where tribal fishing would be exclusive, and then there would be fishing in common with the citizens of the territory at the usual and accustomed fishing spots, which were off reservation. And those off-reservation rights blanketed most of Northwest Washington. And the tribes knew what they were doing. They didn't have the power to stop it completely, but they were firm. And so they had language that, of course, was not written in their languages or even spoken in their languages, spoken in the Chinook jargon. It was written in the language of the conqueror, but we know from the proceedings what both parties intended. And so the treaties were adopted, and in some ways kind of sat there. The tribes kept fishing and hunting off the reservations. And in the early days, when the population of Washington was so small, there wasn't that much controversy. It essentially winched up as more people came, and more people to complain about Indian fishing. Into the 20th century, the process continued, and then after World War II, you just had a huge number of new boats out on the water, offshore, non-Indian boats, more recreation fishing, and more direct crises. People getting thrown in jail. As you know, Billy, thrown in jail 50 times. And it began to build. Now, this is when the tribes, who never did have the money to hire attorneys and never did know how to approach a foreign government that spoke a different language, had a different legal system, and a different economic system. Pretty understandable how to go about it. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Hank Adams and others. And the civil rights movement was now in full force in the mid-60s. And the tribes were wary of it. They respected very much African Americans for pushing ahead the way they were, and particularly respected their tactics and learned those tactics. They also had two fears about becoming deeply involved in the overall civil rights movement. One was that they would get lost in it, just as a matter of numbers, and that Indian rights wouldn't really be that significant if it kind of merged with the larger civil rights movement. And secondly, boy, when you looked at it, the civil rights movement was over assimilation. And now, with some people coming back from universities and coming back from the Korean War and already back from World War II, you had kind of a broader knowledge base, a better understanding of the majority society. And they knew what assimilation meant, and they were, to be serious, with Vine Deloria Jr., were philosophers. And really worried about what sovereignty was, and worried about what treaty rights were, and tried to articulate them. And they could see that there was, the civil rights movement was terrific. Some of its lessons were terrific, but the tribes had to go it on their own, and did they ever? And I think most people here have a pretty good sense of what these people who had nothing and they did have nothing in the sense that I mentioned, were able to put together the crusade that they did. We know about the marches, the takeovers. I got kind of fascinated at the really long-range thinking of coming up with having the American Friends Society write a book about it, about putting together a movie, a video. And talk about long range, oh boy. And this kind of ties us into Evergreen, which I know doesn't have a law school, but now this is a place where this spirit is evident. Ralph Johnson, who had his memorial service right here, one of the leading law professors in the country, and who specialized in Indian law, and I learned a lot from Ralph. And Ralph and I, this was before I was an elder. Ralph was an elder. He was 20 years older than I was before I was. And Ralph and I talked about how great it was in Indian country to be an elder, because, like, look at me, I get served first at this great meal we had today. Great, I'm an elder. I can say any goddamn thing I want to. And so he started saying, and he called the state of Washington racist. And this is a polite gentleman, and everybody knew he was a polite gentleman. And he called him racist for some reason. So one day, Ralph comes back from teaching property. Back then, it's different now. Law professors used to teach through the curriculum. The idea was you kind of teach every course. And this was the first year he was teaching property. He was tenured by then, and it was hard. And so he came back and kind of straggled into his office, and there were, is the number about right, Hank, 12 Indians in his office. And Ralph said, "Excuse me?" His office wasn't that big. And they said, "We want you to teach Indian law." And Ralph said, "I don't know a thing about Indian law." And he says, "Nobody else does either." And it was probably Adams. But somebody said, "That's why we're here. Because nobody knows anything about it. We've got to change that." What vision? Talk about vision of understanding all you had to do over time to accomplish your results. Well, at that time, and you know, this is one of many measures you can see about what Indian people have accomplished over this key period of time, this revival. There were, when they walked into Ralph's office, apparently 12 Indian people in the country who were lawyers. Today it's over 3,000. And right away in '68, the University of New Mexico started up a program. Ralph was now teaching to train new Indian lawyers, and the rest is history, and we've just got a terrific cadre of Indian attorneys now. We need more, but we'll have more. It's a great field, greatest clients you can possibly have. And the Yakimas, tribal councils. And so they continued. Now, the legal services programs were building up at this time, and I'll leave Hank out of it now, but he's involved in all of this. They contacted the new Native American Rights Fund. There's a legal services program for the state of Washington, and all of a sudden you had 4 or 5 lawyers for tribes. And you had Al Zients, who was a greatly respected member of the Washington Bar, who was, to his great credit, and I've asked him, because I interviewed Alvin, of course, for this book, is not one, he won't quantify this, but oh boy, did he bill the macaw generously. He didn't write down all his hours, and he billed at a very low rate. And he did it because he believed in it. And he believes in it to this day. And so now they had a pretty good legal cadre, building up institutions, not just being out in the streets, but building up institutions. Now, the name of this case, the Bolt decision case, is United States against Washington. It's not Muckleshoot and Nisqually tribes and 18 others against Washington. It's the United States against Washington. And let me tell you something. Boy, does it ever matter to a federal judge, because these decisions get made by one person, in this case, Judge Bolt. It is a huge difference to them if somebody stands up and says, Your Honor, I represent the following Indian tribes. Or if the trial begins with an Assistant Attorney General of the United States standing up and say, Your Honor, we represent the United States of America on behalf of these tribes. It changes everything. So the tribes worked hard to lobby Stan Pitkin as Sid Lezak had done in Oregon a few years before, to have U.S. against Oregon filed, to get U.S. against Washington filed. This was the Nixon White House they had to go through. But the Justice Department signed off in Washington to Pitkin's request coming from the tribes, and the Nixon White House let it go. And so U.S. against Washington was filed. Judge Bolt became appointed to be the judge. The attorneys and the clients, the Indian clients, who were very much a part of this decision-making, really concerned. He was a law and order judge, tough judge, Eisenhower appointee, but they decided not to ask him to recuse himself. He stayed on. The case finally went to trial, took 6 weeks, 10,000-page transcript, expert witnesses. Barbara Lane came in. Barbara Lane was recruited by the tribes. There are two people who know this case and who lived through it really give two main reasons for why the tribes won. One was Barbara Lane's testimony. She was spectacular by every account. And she had been brought in by the tribes, recommended to the attorneys. And then there was the end of the trial. And like a lot of trials, things kind of went back and forth. The Washington attorneys trying the tribe, I think, were not as able as the attorneys for the United States and particularly the tribes. But certainly you couldn't really tell going into the last week of the trial. Well, here was one problem, and I just wanted to have this map up on the board. It's a Fisheries Commission map. that all of you know the terrain well, but it's worth putting up because there's no doubt Judge Bolt was an expert in complex civil litigation, of which very little civil litigation is as complex as this one. And so what Judge Bolt had to worry about was that if he did rule that the tribes had a right, and many other issues, look at the complexity of what he had to do. You've got 20 tribes spread around. You've got numerous power salmon rivers, most of them sending out 5 or 6 species with different runs at different times of the year from different tributaries. Now, the tribes argued they wanted 50% of the run, but how do you go about doing that, and how do the tribes go about regulating, which they requested to be able to be self-regulating? And so any judge would pale at taking jurisdiction over something like this. It may be that this is the most complex court order ever handed down to enforce. And for example, I would say that this geographic area, which by the way has the Chinooks turning north at the mouth of the Columbia River, and then turning north coming out of these rivers, the big Chinook, going several thousand miles up to Alaska and back. And just imagine in your mind ordering court busing in Los Angeles. This is probably more complicated. And those salmon are a lot, slipperier and sneaky and cover a whole lot more terrain, not terrain, but geography than the kids do. So it was a daunting thing for any judge to take jurisdiction. The Quinaults were the last tribe to testify for a variety of reasons. But the Quinaults probably had the most extensive regulatory system of any of the tribes. Extensive in the sense of being written down and having a large number of regulations, written regulations, and enforcement officers. And I put it in those terms because all the tribes had very rigorous systems. Very rigorous systems. Take no more than you can use. Never take so much that you're affecting a village upstream. You got to shut down when that stuff happens. And so it wasn't as though tribes didn't have regimes, but they weren't written down. The Quinaults were. And if you're a federal judge, that is impressive to you. And the Quinaults were extremely effective, both the people who testified and the system they were testifying about. The other bit of tribal testimony came at the end when tribal elders testified. And they testified in their own languages through an interpreter. And I've heard this from everybody, including attorneys from the state. Judge Bolt was transfixed. He just was zoning in on those witnesses. He always was an intense judge and paid attention, but this was something that he really was paying attention to. And the tribal witnesses testified to a number of things, including what was intended at treaty time. And the tribal witnesses ended up saying, in response to questions from the state who were objecting to live tribal witnesses in 1974, 73 was when the trial was, the end of the trial, testifying about what happened in 1854, 5, and 6. They weren't there. And so it's hearsay, they said. But expert witnesses can testify about past events. And the tribal witnesses said, our oral history is as valid as your written history. And Judge Bolt didn't officially accept that, but he allowed the testimony in, and over those objections, and paid great attention to them, and came to understand and feel, I think he felt the culture, felt the way that when Indian fishers go out on the streams, they have in their minds that this is something that has been going on forever. I'm carrying on something that has been done forever. And understood the spirituality of it, and the authenticity of these people, that these weren't play Indians. These were just Indian people who fished or who were in families that were fishing families. And so that's taken together what I mean by the tribes writing the Bolt decision, because they were the people who put together the original vast and elaborate system that the tribal negotiators at the treaty wanted to keep in place, and the negotiators at the treaty said that we want to keep this in place. And then the tribal leaders of the 1960s and 70s went out and built up public opinion behind them, public opinion that caused the U.S. attorney to get strenuously involved and brought the United States in on behalf of the tribe. Went out and got the attorneys, the best attorneys. Many of you know David Getchus, who passed away 5 years ago, who was lead attorney from the Native American Rights Fund, and others, and then brought forward the witnesses that carried the day, both the expert witness and the tribal witnesses. And so you end up with a tremendous, because look, tribes have accomplished a lot in modern times, a whole lot. But nobody in Washington, D.C. was sitting around saying, what can we do for the tribes today? The tribes brought all this forward. And this is just a shining, shining example. And so on February 12th, 1974, Lincoln's birthday, Judge Bolt chose the day intentionally. He released his opinion holding that the tribes' treaties guaranteed them the right to take 50% of the runs passing their usual and accustomed fishing stations, held that the treaties were valid, held that the tribes were sovereign governments who could regulate, and a number of other things. And again, you take, and I want so much, there are a lot of young people here, and I'm so glad there are, and all of us really. I just hope we keep in mind forever and pass on. And this is really the reason the Fisheries Commission asked me to write a book about the Bolt decision, was to pass on information, particularly to young people who weren't alive when the Bolt decision was passed down, handed down 41 and a half years ago. And so I just hope we all remember what a magnificent and historic opinion this was. And in terms of the American legal system working the way it should, working exactly how it should. This was one of its most shining moments. And in terms of bringing justice to dispossessed people, you can put U.S. against Washington, the Bolt decision, written by the tribes, right next to Brown against Board of Education as our greatest cases to vindicate the rights of dispossessed peoples. The Bolt decision, in a sense, well, I was going to say, was so foundational and has had impacts across the Northwest, but nationally also, in the tribal revival of in modern times. Now, it's very direct here in the Northwest, and what happened was that, well, the tribes are going to be regulating their members. Right away, the federal government, in response to tribal requests, came forth very generously with grants to provide for the drafting of regulations, the hiring of enforcement officers, the scientific staffs. Oh, you are so rich in scientists, the tribes today. You've got some 200 fisheries biologists and scientists working for you on the reservations or at the Fisheries Commission, and that's a little bit more than the state has in terms of fishery scientists, and a little bit less than the United States in the state of Washington. And across Indian country. That's one of the distinctive things about modern Indian tribes is that they're likely to have substantial scientific operations and other technical, but also the fisheries operations. So now, and you have to set up courts. So the tribes all rejuvenated their courts, the Bolt decision tribes. And then, seeing how this worked, the tribes began setting up administrative agencies and institutions in other areas. We are tribes. And as you know, when we say they had nothing in the mid-60s, that includes the fact that they basically, in real-world terms, had almost no sovereignty. John Marshall Chief Justice Marshall said they did, but the BIA had overridden it and suppressed tribal sovereignty and traditions, as you know. And so now the tribes are beginning the process of becoming real sovereigns, which they are today. On every reservation, I'll say essentially every reservation, but every reservation in Northwest Washington for sure, and I think almost every reservation, the majority of laws are made by the tribes. The states make some, the federal government makes some, but the tribes make the majority. And appreciate that while the tribes don't have complete sovereignty, the states don't either. And one important area where states lack jurisdiction is over Indian country, where state sovereignty is extremely limited in Indian country. And again, certainly in the Pacific Northwest. And so the tribes now start going through the process of creating real sovereign governments. Real in this sense. In the mid-60s, when we had nothing, when they had nothing, tribal governments would have 1, 1/2, or 0 tribal employees. Today, most of the tribes here have 300 or more governmental employees. And I'm going to say all of them are 150 or over. Serious governments doing serious sovereign activities. And that began with the Bolt decision and the impetus built. And it had the same effect around the country. There are other developments too, but the Bolt decision was a big part of it. And when you get sovereignty established in one place, it tends to spread, and it spread here over to the issue of gaming. So that state of Washington can't regulate Indian gaming in Idaho, and it can't regulate it on the reservations either. I understand that Indian Gaming Regulatory Act gives some authority to the state, but that's because of that particular statute, but the tribes make the decisions on gaming. And the balance sheets show what has happened. So, I want to tie it to education just in this sense that one of the greatest things that has happened in Indian country has been, and I think in the sense that I think the Bolt decision triggered a lot, has been the access to education for Indian people, young and middle-aged and elder. We can come too, my fellow elders on the reservation say. And so just, I don't know, sometime talk to people about how much education there was back before the Bolt decision and how much there is now. There's a relationship, and there's something to hold on to forever. Let me finish by saying this. It just occurred to me this morning. I have a belt buckle that has bear's ears on it. Bear's Ears is a formation in southern Utah on top of Cedar Mesa. And if you look at it from the south, it's just amazing. There are these two ears sitting up there about 40 miles away, really large. And you look at them and you say, those look like bear's ears. And Indian people were saying it's 7,000 years ago. And so 5 tribes, the Hopi, the Navajo, the Zuni, the Ute Mountain Ute, and the Northern Ute are proposing a national monument, like a national park, in southern Utah that would be 1.9 million acres. That's about 3.5% of the entire state of Utah. That would be a national monument in which the tribes would co-manage it with the United States of America. That's the petition that's gone to President Obama, who has shown signs that he's interested in doing this. With a national monument, it's almost the only place left where a president can just sign on the dotted line and pass extraordinarily influential laws. Don't have to go to Congress, don't have to do an environmental impact statement, don't have to do anything except have ink in your pen. And so President Obama has authority to do this, and I've been working carefully with them, and they have submitted a very elaborate proposal for this national monument. There's one place in the country where there is co-management between tribes in the United States of America. One place, here. That's the only place. Every other tribe is envious. Everybody knows about co-management. Everybody knows that the tribes in the Northwest are doing it. But none of the federal officials want to give up their, as they see it, their authority. And they don't like it. But there's been more and more talk about expanding it from here. And and Bears Ears would be the first place. And so be proud of the Bolt decision. Be proud always. See that your kids and grandkids are proud. See that these stories, the story of the Bolt decision, gets passed down like all the other stories, and the values of it get passed down. And when President Obama signs into law the Bears Ears National Monument within the next 6 or 8 months, just say to yourselves, yes, we did it. We did it again. Thank you. Were we going to do questions? Got some questions? I'll be glad to take as many as we think we should. Cindy, I think Cindy has a list, but I don't see Cindy. Oh, okay. Okay, she's got it. That's how she's. Great.
Hi, my name's Susan Hamilton, and in your book, Blood Struggle, you wrote that was ANCSA, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, a termination in disguise. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. I described ANCSA, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act in 1971, in Blood Struggle as being termination in disguise. That is a phrase that came, by the way, out of the Berger Commission in the 80s, where a group of us at hearings talked that issue through and concluded that, yes, it is termination in disguise. And the reason that it's termination in disguise is that the Alaska Natives received 44 million acres as a result of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. That's 2/3. Well, it's larger than the state of Washington, and it's spread around Alaska. But it is held by corporations. And in 71, and ANCSA went back to Washington in the late 60s, and then was passed in 71. And this was after Lucy Covington at Colville had really driven the final stake into termination, official termination, when she was elected chair at Colville. And tribal council that was anti-termination. But there were still terminationists on Capitol Hill, including Wayne Aspinall, the chair of the House Interior Committee, and Scoop Jackson, the head of the chair of the Interior Committee in the Senate. And they didn't want Alaska Natives to have much land, and started out, by the way, their early offers were between 100,000, I think, from Aspinall and 1 million from Jackson. And I think I have those figures, I'm recalling them correctly. And so they ended up with 44 million. But at the time, the word sovereignty hadn't been used by the Supreme Court since the 1800s to describe tribes. And the big Indian law opinions hadn't started to come down yet. The Bolt decision hadn't come down yet. a case called the McClanahan opinion hadn't come down yet. And this was right when I was starting at NARF. And the idea of sovereignty, I mean, now we worry about not having enough sovereignty. And we believe tribes should have more than they have. But back then, there really was a question, are they really sovereigns? Is the court going to say they're sovereigns? And it hadn't done it yet. And so people didn't understand the potential of sovereignty. People didn't understand that an Indian tribe is a much better economic vehicle than a corporation. Because an Indian tribe can do everything a corporation can do, and in addition, it can charter corporations because they're governments. And they have regulatory authority, which corporations don't. But that sort of thinking, we can recognize that now. And tribes don't want to be corporations. They know that that's a step back, it's many steps backwards. And also, the corporations were state corporations. So, termination in disguise, because here's a lot of land. But sorry about those hunting and fishing rights. Sorry about those water rights. Sorry about the lack of sovereignty. Live with it, Alaska Natives. And I'll tell you something, as I think many of you know, the Alaska Natives have fought this as hard as they could since about 1980, when it really became clear how bad it was. And by the way, termination also sets membership as of the date of the act at ANCSA, so that children born after the passage of ANCSA in 71, well, aren't natives. They don't even have stock in the state corporations. And so, and this is complicated stuff and so on, but whereas, of course, we know that tribal membership is an ever-increasing and decreasing body of people, with all young people who meet the requirements of the Constitution, tribal constitutions come in. So that's what was meant, that it was the terminationists ending up having their way. The Nixon White House did, the Nixon White House, I mean, I am not a Richard Nixon fan, I promise. But there aren't that many presidents who ever have been better environmentalists or better Indian advocates than the Nixon White House. It's just a fact. Now, I'm leaving Teddy Roosevelt out of the environmental side. I mean, there's never and never will be anybody like Teddy Roosevelt. And Nixon wasn't either. But Nixon, in the next group, so the Nixon White House, at the same time Blue Lake was going through, people talked about that earlier today, wanted it to be more land, and he got him, pushed Congress to get it up to 44 million. And that's how a main reason it got up that high. But it's not sovereign land. Good.
My name is Georgiana Couts. I'm from the Nisqually Indian Reservation. I appreciate the books that you have wrote, because when they condemned our reservation in 1917, they took everything. They just didn't take the land, they took the language, they took the culture, they took everything. They said, go across the river and become farmers. We finally did get our reservation back, but we never got running water till 1969. And like he says, when we did the boat decision, we had nothing. We used people like Marlon Brando and everybody, and it was a good thing that we had Hank, to work with us to get it through. I think Hank did a lot, Billy, a lot of people, and Janet McLeod. But also, you know, the question is that the Bolt decision didn't give us something that wasn't ours. It belonged to us. He reaffirmed all the land we gave away, that we could do this forever. And the people that signed their X's knew what was important: hunting, fishing, shellfish, and gathering rights. You got to be grateful for those people at that time. But I'd like to thank you for the books. I came to Evergreen State College probably 72 because I was looking for Native American professors. I found them, but I didn't find my history. And that was later done by Cecilia Carpenter, who wrote the books about who we are and what we are. But make sure that the young people understand that this reaffirmed who we were, that we had that right. They didn't give it to us. We had to go to court and fight it. We had to go to court and fight for the shellfish. We're going to court and we're going to fight for the hunting rights. So, when they say, I'm not going to fight anymore, that's not true. We're going to continue to fight for our sovereignty and all the things we want. But if you write the books, they'll be read, because they're not going to tell the story of Indian people and the atrocities that happened to them clear across the United States. And today, casinos are giving us some say over our destiny, that we can do something. I grew up on that reservation watching people die, my own mother. So I'm grateful for the books you write about Hank, the Bolt decision, about Billy Frank. We can go there now and learn things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to, one of the aspects of the Bolt decision, there's a name in there. I went up to see if it was on the map, but it's still Squamish. And David Getchie's for North brought into the case a federally unrecognized tribe, which was the Stillaguamish. And that was almost by accident at the outset, but it was through the decades-long efforts of Esther Ross to secure recognition, going back to the First World War onward. And you've done some work down with the terminated tribes of Oregon. And one name you don't see up, well, there's no map up there now, but you don't see Duwamish up there. You don't see Chinook up there. And I'm wondering if you might relate to some aspects of the tribes that have come into being, as well as, after the Bolt decision, Judge Bolt recognized the Stillaguamish treaty rights, and they were still an unrecognized tribe. And Dave Getchies and Chuck Trimble of National Congress of American Indians and Suzanne Harjo worked in D.C. to bring about that federal recognition to more or less correlate the recognized right with the sovereign status that still wasn't there yet. So I'm wondering if you might relate to some of those aspects that continue on into the future, either as resolved issues or unresolved issues. And I'm speaking particularly, say, take your Siletz experience, where you had a tribe out of being for a while and then comes back into being. But you have Duwamish, you have Chief Seattle, what was his tribe? You have Billy Frank, who gets his Tobin origins from up on Elliott Bay area, the Cedar River area, with the Tobins and the James family. And in the 50s, they were talking about how good the fishing was out at the Tobin place, you know. And that was Billy Frank's grandmother, great-grandmother. And yet there's no Duwamish on that map. There's no Duwamish back in that federal list of 562 tribes, is that it? That had delegates at the White House just a week ago. There was no Duwamish there. You know, so I'm asking you to relate to some of those issues. And, you know, one of the great injustices in my national Indian political career is that there are Lumbees of North Carolina. You know, I spent a day in trial down there when Lumbees were being acquitted for stealing, and they were charged with theft of government documents, and they had 8,000 pounds, and they were testifying in court. You know, that speak of education. They were still writing their names with X's. They hadn't got beyond the second or fourth grade among 3 defendants. But they were looking in those documents for their culture, and they testified to that. And yet, Indians across this land, tribal nations across this land, have opposed recognition of that Indian heritage of the Lumbee Indians by the United States, by the Congress.
I was just saying I'd add to that Native Hawaiians, right? In the same group. Yeah. Well, yeah.
And even that Lumbee issue where, you know, the sovereignty of other tribes go to deny the existence even of Lumbee people in North Carolina
Yeah.
as Indian people.
Well, you know, Hank, in a way, I don't know what to do really other than to say that you describe accurately a real inequity in federal Indian law. And this is the inequity of tribes who are so-called non-recognized. They actually probably are recognized, but the recognition procedure is very elaborate. It's BIA regulations, and it takes a very long time, sometimes 20 years, to go through the recognition process. And there are technicalities that can disqualify a tribe. Well, it's very arbitrary, and I don't think the Duwamish ever came before Judge Bold. No, they didn't come before Judge Bold. The Stillaguamish did. And one would guess that they would have had a good chance if they'd come before Judge Bold. And it happened they didn't. Now, you raised the question, and then there's the Lumbees, a tribe of, they're really the second largest tribe next to the Cherokees in North Carolina. And the Lumbees are non-recognized. They have a good bunch of land. They are a tribal community, but and they try to get recognized by Congress or by the Department of Interior. And with all of these tribes and some others, some recognized tribes oppose it. I mean, they see it as it being a pie to be divided. And if we let in a tribe as big as the Lummies, that's going to take a lot of appropriations away from other tribes. And I think, like yourself, I guess I got to say, I wish it were otherwise. And I wish that, and it's a little hard for me as a non-Indian particularly, to be criticizing tribes in general for taking particular positions, but I certainly wish all those tribes were recognized. I think, from what I know of them, they each deserve it, but it's kind of a loophole, and the recognition process, if you go through what's on the books, is just very, very difficult. So wish I could say more, but I don't know what to exactly, because you, I thought, described it well. Yes.
You were talking about the Alaska situation with the tribes. Are the tribes working towards becoming a little more sovereign as far as having their own, instead of being a corporation?
The tribes in Alaska are using a number of strategies, yes, to establish sovereignty. And it's kind of complicated, but one thing they've done now, they have a huge case now that is on appeal, but it would allow them to put land back into trust, so that if the corporation, you know, there are villages, there are village corporations, and there are 10 regional corporations. They own land. There are a number of places where the village corporations, who are in the same village as the village tribes, and there are tribes, and the tribes have sovereignty, but they don't have any land over which to exercise it. And so the village corporations are willing to just transfer their land to the tribes and then have the tribes have it put into trust, and now you've got land over which you've got jurisdiction. And on particular circumstances, one court, the key court, has upheld that in favor of the tribes. Now, we'll see where it goes, but it's very, very promising. And so...
And as far as Canadian status, I know the Clinkets have won a lot of land inside the Clinkets have won a lot of land, and up there is like a record amount of land. And so, do you suspect that's going to be a trend as far as trickling down into the lower 48?
I don't know. I don't know enough about that, about the Tlingit situation that you described. I know of it, but I don't want to try to predict it. Thanks for the...
Charles, on Alaska Native issues, I think I'd like to note that in May of this year, Charles Etok Edwardson died in the Arctic Circle in his land of Barrow. But he, more than any other Native person, working with former deceased now Congressman Lloyd Meads of Bellingham and Senator Fred Harris of Oklahoma, were the key movers of getting the acreage increased to the millions, the 44 million acres from a maximum 13 million, so it was being accepted by Senator Henry Jackson of Washington, but it was Lloyd Meads in the House and Senator Fred Harris of Oklahoma. And you have to recognize that and Charlie Edwardson, who
Let me say
went
real quickly, Hank, I
Okay.
appreciate your saying that,
okay.
because I had focused on the Nixon White House, which was important at this time, but mentioning Meads and Fred is important.
But Edwardson, you know, he's one of the great losses to the Indian world in this year, like Billy last year.
Yes. I agree with that, and he is somebody who reminds you of Billy in certain ways, I think. Reminds a person of Billy in certain ways. Yeah.
Earlier you mentioned co-management and the importance of co-management. And here in the Northwest, we're facing another serious threat with coal trains, oil trains coming through our territories and destroying our environment and affecting our salmon runs and other resources. So as a part of co-management, is there a tie to the Bolt decision? There's arguments made on the importance of this sustaining our way of life and the threats that are coming, because they are coming, and it's a constant concern and challenges for tribes up here. And they're glad to hear the Keystone was taken off the table. But Doctor, do you think there's a connection or an argument to be made on behalf of tribes regarding using Bolt to this next threat of these coal trains coming through?
Well, in terms of Cherry Point, that particular project, the Lummies are, to me, from what I've seen, are doing everything you can do. And other tribes are involved as well. And I didn't know the Yakimas were, but it figures you would be with your location. And so the Bolt decision can help, and so can U.S. against Oregon help. But it doesn't look to me as though that's going to block it. It looks like that ultimately, probably, if it does go ahead, it'll be because of a political decision that the courts don't disturb. I don't pretend to know the answer, but it's the tribes have a terrific environmental argument and a moral argument. I don't see an overwhelming legal argument. I see a good legal argument. I don't see an overwhelming legal argument. Based on the Bolt decision.
What the second phase of Bolt that deals with habitat and that we filed against the culvert cases?
Yeah.
And on Bolt, we can't have any basis that puts whoever that phase two. Ask Jim Peters.
Go ahead. Yes, right. And it was just argued in the Ninth Circuit. So we'll see.
Hachchechoktia Adal Misan Kuliotle. Hi, my name's Miss Ann. My real name is Ann Penn Charles, and I just want to thank you for that book. You know, we always hear oral stories from our elders, those of us that are story keepers from our families. But for those of us that lived through those fish wars, fearing them game wardens, fearing anybody in a uniform, that's how I grew up. My father was the late Christian Jiggs Penn from the Quileute tribe, and he worked along with Billy Frank, Hank Adams up there. But before that, you know, it was the elders that taught him things. So my father wasn't an educated man. He quit school in the 8th grade. So your information that you talked about in your book, you know, they weren't educated people that signed those treaties. But yet, those that did sign the treaties knew how to live, how to take care of the land, what we need and what season we needed to keep our village going to the next part of the season. So I want to thank you. And, you know, I got the invite from my daughter of your speech, your talk here. But I took my father's spot in our Quileute fish committee. I grew up fishing. You know, if we wanted to do stuff, my dad told us, you earn half, I'll pay half. You know, those were the days you had to work for the stuff that you wanted. You know, back in the day, it wasn't Jordans for us, it was Converse. You know, they were $28. You know, I had to make $14. But when I seen the struggles that our men went and they got arrested, those $14 I would give to my dad so he could help bail them out, because they were protecting our right to go out there and fish. Then the women would get out there because they knew how to run that boat and motor, and they could set that net just as well. So they always had a backup plan. And us young girls, we were hired to be the smelters. You know, we would go out and smelt all summer long. You know, sometimes we'd give our money to those that needed it. You know, we didn't worry about those Converse. But that's how it was in the day. And so I just wanted to thank you, because it's in writing. It's down in a book, and nobody can take that away. But what you talked about was us younger ones need to keep educating the younger ones, because we just recently went through a lengthy trial for our fishing. And you know, I still have a lot of friendships and respect for those that put things in writing. They put the oral history out. And so when we had to ask our elders to step forward, they did without a doubt. They weren't educated either. They went out there fishing and logging just to put food on the table. So I just wanted to thank you. I read your book, and you know, my father was the forefront. He was the only one that testified within our Quileute tribe. You know, it was just those sacrifices that I lived through, that Willie lived through. You know, I bond with those children of our mothers and fathers that went out there and protested. They probably have a longer rap sheet than some of our other people, you know, and so it took a long time for them to clear their name. And just a few years ago, you were able to clear all your arrests that were on your record for fishing and going out there doing your treaty gathering. So I just wanted to say, Wat Tilitstiasto Liats Kalaho.
Thank you.
Tatsklawit, good evening. My name is Joel Moffett from the Nez Perce tribe. Want to thank you, Mr. Wilkinson, for your remarks here today, and thank you personally for what you've done for the Nez Perce tribe over the years, as well as for the tribes across this country. Kind of looking forward, I know that you train lawyers, that's your day job, and so you see a lot of young minds coming up, and going forward, the landscape that we're seeing, at be it the state level, state Supreme Court, or the federal level, what can I get your thoughts on a case of the Bolt's magnitude, and how the tribes put up our treaty rights in order to basically we put ourselves on line, our treaties on line in order to fight for this the right to fish, and we came out on top with the Bolt decision. But going forward, we hear advice from NARF and others that says, and they've done NCAI and others have done studies that says, the Supreme Court, the way it stands now, and state courts, it's not good. They're not friendly to Indian country. So, but going forward, just a crystal ball, if you could see it into the future, what are the odds of, Yellowwash was talking about the protecting our environment from coal trains, but eventually we're going to have to put up our treaties again. When there's, what's 50% of nothing, so, we talk about like eels, on the Columbia River, they're getting down to, dangerously low levels. You get 9, 10 crossing Lower Granite Dam into Idaho when they used to come back and hundreds of thousands, and we have place names in Idaho named after the eel. So when you get species like that, where tribes depend on them, and it gets so low, we're going to have to put up our treaties again and fight for that species, fight for our brother and sister. What do you see as the landscape? What chance do we have today and in the future for another significant bold decision that reaffirms our treaty rights?
Well, one thing I will say, and I won't refer to names or parties, but this upcoming presidential election figures to give the new president 1, 2, or 3 appointments. It's a 5-4 court. Either side will likely appoint young people. There's a hell of a lot at stake. And we're in a time where parties are, particularly the Republicans, are putting forth very Republican nominations to the court. The truth is that the Clinton and Obama appointments, in my view, have had more classic appointments than the Republican appointments have been. But whatever, one judges the quality of the judges. This election has got to mean a lot. And you could end up with a court that's 7-2 in either direction. That would be the maximum, but it could be that much. And boy, the tribes, right now you've got a court where basically 4 judges are off the table for tribes. Occasionally, we've gotten a vote or so out of that block. And then you've got Kennedy, who is very conservative, but is kind of in the middle. And then you've got 4 judges that are generally favorable to the tribes. So the tribes have to win all of those judges and Kennedy. I mean, that's what it is now. I mean, it's really hard. I mean, you have 4 people who are just rabid on bunches of issues, and tribes are right in them. I think it's the most irresponsible group we've had on the court during my career. So that's part of the problem. Now, so that NARF and NCAI and most tribal lawyers don't file at all. They shouldn't say that. But they should caution. In other words, boy, when the Bolt decision went up, there was a pretty good court back then. And it was a 6-3 decision affirming Judge Bolt. And it was a pretty good court. It is not now a pretty good court. And so we've got to recognize that. But if an individual tribe has a serious case, then there can be good reason for going up. You can't make black and white statements about it. It does depend on the individual case. And for example, in your case, I thought you were courageous to file the Culvert case, because this is the same situation. I mean, that's the kind of blockbuster case, big case. But still, you went ahead with it. And I admire that. And you went ahead with the shellfish case. That was a hell of a big case, but you brought it up. So there are times, and it's interesting to see the lawyers for these 20 tribes working together, which they do. I mean, they made those decisions jointly after a lot of debate, and I respect that, and I think that's lucky to have it done that way. It can mean things. It can mean things may move slowly, trying to get everybody together, but nonetheless, there are benefits in that, because these are very tough issues. So it depends on the case, and there just are cases when you got to say, damn it, we've got to do this. And the court basically had one case that came down last term that the tribes won, not a major case. They'd lost something like 15 in a row. I mean, that's obscene. That's, well, Ralph Johnson isn't here to call it racism, and I'm not going to go that far. I'm not going to go that far, unless you catch me out in the hallway without a microphone. But certainly it's intolerance and narrow-mindedness at its worst, and mean-spiritedness. How about that? So it's a bad situation. The lower courts have been kind of okay. Could you say that again into the microphone?
Co-management, it ain't working for the Indians. Just like now, we got one of the best hatcheries there is in the state of Washington.
Yeah.
We got 58,000 fish. We got 2,400. We're supposed to got 29,000.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So
I
the
see.
co-management ain't working for all the tribes.
Yeah.
The state went back. They got North. They got North of Falcon and everything. North of Falcon is different. That's up north. We're low man on totem pole, and
Yeah.
the Squally is.
Yeah.
And they put us all in the same bunch, and half the tribes don't even get to 50%. See, that co-management's got to change, or they got to go river by river or something like that. You can't put 25 tribes in one spot and give them the
Yeah.
whole thing, you know.
Well, the problem also involves climate change and other factors. And I want to say, I mean, there's no group in the country that is being more effective and more persuasive than the tribes of the Northwest in preserving the salmon runs. You are going to great lengths with your scientists, with the Indian voice, which can be very persuasive and compelling, with lobbying, with bringing in funds. I feel you are doing what you can do. And I think you should be proud of it. And I know you're not going to stop. I mean, Billy Frank, that would be the first thing he'd say. I mean, he'd want to do more. We all want to do more, but I do want to say you're doing a hell of a lot. You're doing more than anybody else is. I want to say with the lampreys that came up earlier, the lampreys, nobody spoke up for the lampreys except the tribes. I mean, nobody did. Everybody else said, rotenome them. They're no goddamn good. They're not worth anything. And you know they are. Plus, you know they taste good. And they are good for the ecosystem and the natural rivers. And you are the people. Now, there may be a bolt decision claim there with the case of the lampreys. And you haven't brought it yet, but as far as I know, and maybe you'll decide to do that. But right now, you are doing a lot in terms of getting appropriations and just getting agencies to understand that, hey, wait a minute, we've got to stop killing these damn things and try to beef those runs back up. And that's been the tribes. So, I mean, those are great contributions you're making.
One last intervention is, let me see, and I almost forgot it. 15 years ago in Joe Delacruz's last appearance here at Evergreen and my last meeting with him,
I think I didn't hear that name.
when Joe Delacruz was here
Joe
in
Delacruz,
January
okay.
of 2003, 3 months before his death. Then it was noted that the U.S. Supreme Court was monstrously slouching toward Dred Scott relative to Indian issues. And that was partly because you'd had Justice Stevens and I think Justice Ginsburg questioning sovereign immunity, I think in an Oklahoma cigarette case, but suggesting that it might be time to do away with Indian sovereign immunity.
Sovereign immunity, yeah.
Now, at this point, you have in this presidential campaign, and the point of that being that these were justices who were deemed favorable to Indians, and yet they were starting to tip in another direction. And then you had Clarence Thomas almost ever since, or for quite a few years. But this year in the presidential campaign, you have Donald Trump saying, you know, we need a court suit, we need litigation to resolve the issue of birthright citizenship. And they use an 1884 case, Elk versus Wilkins, to say that the 14th Amendment didn't give citizenship to Indian people, and they had to wait till the 1924 Citizenship Act. So the Constitution doesn't give, when we deport 11 million non-citizen Mexicans and South Americans across the border, we can deport those who were born here because the Constitution doesn't really grant birthright citizenship. And Donald Trump, in a number of forums, has says we need to bring a lawsuit on that. And that implicates Indian rights. It implicates the Citizenship Act, the 14th Amendment, Elk versus Wilkins, and it becomes a way of denying both Indian rights and rights under the Constitution to other people. And you know that the two early U.S. Supreme Court decisions, Fletcher versus Peck and Johnson v. McIntosh, I think 1808 and 1823, which became denials of Indian title to lands in the first instance, and adoption of the doctrine of discovery in the second case. And in each of those cases, there were no Indian plaintiffs, no Indian defendants. Indians weren't involved in either of those cases, and yet they have been controlling upon many Indian rights throughout American history. So I'm saying that when people don't listen to what Donald Trump is saying about we're going to bring a lawsuit to resolve this issue of birthright citizenship and invoke the Elk versus Wilkins case, which is Indian, and the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, which is Indian, but you're proposing a lawsuit to resolve complex issues, both legal rights and constitutional rights. And again, this may be done without any Indians involved to speak to it, except by amicus or intervention.
Yeah. Well, I'll say only that I don't think those comments by Trump have had any traction, really, and I don't expect them to be.
But if he were elected president, then he'd direct what lawsuits the Justice Department.
Right. And I think that lawsuit fails.
But I'm saying, you know, it is enough of an issue on, you know, the laws from Arizona to Alabama based upon some of the same premises. I'm saying these lawsuits
Yes. And so you're saying that electing Donald Trump has ramifications beyond who he appoints to the Supreme Court? Yeah. Right, right.
If he's elected, you know, there's a lot of problems. There's both
A
the
lot of other ones too.
opposition of the court and the policy.
Yeah, that's right. That's okay. I agree, but I don't think that argument's going to I mean that's in in the Constitution, so I don't see.
But that's why I say many legal scholars say that's not in the Constitution.
Well, he says many legal scholars.
I know, but I'm saying that, who's got the highest ratings right now? You or Donald Trump?
Yeah, you win. You always win.
I just wanted to mention that you have that one paper up there with a couple questions from students from this morning.
This question is so long that, I mean, it's just in terms of physical length. Is the person here who wrote this question, it looks like a good question, or several good questions, but, and it has to do with the privilege against right issue. Is there someone here? I'd love to answer it if you could present it in a shorter way.
Juliana? While he's getting her, we have some presentations for you and some gifting, and so, but afterwards I just want to mention that the students in the Res-Based program need to stay because we have our reflections and things to do and our case for next time to distribute. But I also wanted to mention that the Muckleshoot Charitable Foundation donated a substantial amount of the proceeds to support having Charles Wilkinson come today, and also the students from the Reservation-Based program. And the student who wrote the grant for the Muckleshoot tribe was actually a treasurer 2 years ago. And so one of the efforts, ongoing efforts of the students from student governance, oftentimes even today, you might be working towards benefiting the program in some way that you never actually see because you're always in this effort of paying it forward. And so I want to thank the students from 2 years ago and thank the students that are here this year working to write the grants that will probably be supporting speakers in 2 years. And so it's the ongoing efforts of our students that cause our speakers to be able to be here. So we thank you for that. Juliana?
You wanted me to clarify a part of my question?
Yes, I was just asking, did you ask a question about the difference between privilege and right?
Yeah.
And could you phrase it briefly?
What part?
Because it looks like a good question.
I need to go look at it. Well, in the treaty, under the terms of the treaty, the privilege of hunting on open and unclaimed lands is amongst the reserved rights, and the United States, the state of Washington Supreme Court has ruled that there are no legal distinction between a tribal right or privilege regarding hunting, and under the term open and unclaimed lands has not clearly been defined. Even with the lack of clear definition, tribal hunters are still getting arrested with their guns and animals being confiscated, and private landowners who have allowed tribal hunters permission on their property are getting reprimanded by the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. I want to know your opinion on, with the Bolt decision reaffirming fishing rights and the Rafidi decision reaffirming shellfish rights, and the Culvert case contributing to habitat protection. Could pursuing litigation for clear definition of the terms privilege and open and unclaimed lands help or hurt tribes in reaffirming tribal hunting rights?
Okay, good. First of all, And this is some treaties, not all treaties, but it's there are important treaties and there's good amounts of land involved, saying that hunting is a privilege. In my opinion, and a couple of courts have said this, that there's just no way that the treaty negotiators could have known the difference between privilege and right. And these are English terms, they're legal terms, and you construe treaties, you read treaties, you don't just look at them and read them and in order to understand them, you have to figure out what the tribes would have understood. And so I think that they're properly understood to be rights, not privileges, meaning that they can't be taken away. Open and unclaimed lands, there are a number of treaties that allow it instead of usual and accustomed fishing stations, they say hunting and gathering on open and unclaimed lands. There's a split among lower courts on this, my view is that the tribal position is pretty good. And so the situation does seem to be serious. I know something about it, not a lot, but I've understood from other people, as you say, that people are getting arrested. It seems to me this is not a case that falls under the rubric of you never file a case. Seems to me we've got a pretty good shot at it, and if the attorneys finally decide that, and the tribal councils finally decide that yes, they're willing to risk a bad decision, which could come, but that this is an extremely important issue, then it's one that would be reasonable to go ahead on. I think the tribes have a good legal position, but not absolute. I don't mean it that way, but it seems to me a good position. And so open and unclaimed lands to me certainly means BLM lands. It certainly means Forest Service lands, and except where there are buildings. So that to me, that's how it ought to be resolved by the courts.
I had another question. The United States Environmental Protection Agency completed a study in 2012 showing that 61% of beach closures were due to wastewater treatment plants that were permitted through the state. And could the closures be considered part of the 50% of the public resource, and shouldn't the tribes be compensated for those prohibited areas?
To my knowledge, an issue like that hasn't been ruled upon. I guess I'd want to think about that more and talk about that more and research that more. There are a number of parts of that are fairly complicated. I'm sorry to put it that way, but I guess I feel that way.
It wasn't very clear. The 61% on the EPA website was from the study they did in the Puget Sound and the Georgia Basin. So that's just the information I got.
But whether they should be compensated, I guess I need to know more. I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Jeremiah from Squaxin, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on something a little bit unrelated, or maybe ultimately related in forming of policies and the traumatic histories and things. But if you could comment on your opinion on tribal traditions and cultural practices, and maybe how possibly maintaining them, of course, you know, as evolving people and people that have gotten into the modern world. We all have different lifestyles and we choose different practices and different religions and things, and there are some negative experiences that we share in the forcing of beliefs or the forcing of practices. So, of course, we don't really want to do any of that sort of thing, but maintaining of tribal traditions, of maintaining of languages, of maintaining of our traditional culture, which I think was what really was a backdrop and what really had been the roots of some of our arguments in courts and things, because without any of that, we wouldn't have been able to have witnesses to give great testimony and things like that. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on tribes placing an importance in this modern world where we have a lot of maybe obligations to try to focus a little more on economic developments and building revenue and be able to uplift our people through financial opportunity, but what isn't really talked about so much is the importance of our traditional practices to be able to maintain things that may be coming down the road, and different arguments or litigations and things. But anyway, if I can get your comments, thank you.
Okay, what a fabulous question, and I'm going to answer it, and I feel so strongly about it, I'm serious about this, that these questions have tired the hell out of me already. And that's okay, I like that, you know what I mean? Good, we ought to do things in excess. But this one just brings up enough in me that I'm going to do the best I can, and then I'll sign off. We'll make this the last question, because in a way it's the ultimate question, and I really appreciate it, and it's the question we ought to ask at every meeting. Look, your cultures are so beautiful and important and valuable, not just to you, they're tremendously valuable to your own people, they're valuable to everybody. You have so much to offer. That was one great thing about Billy. I mean, he could just take the Indian way and explain it to a public audience, and the public audience would go away feeling differently about the world, about the natural world, about the people in the world. And your emphasis on family, I mean, I'm serious what I say about elders. You actually honor elders. My people don't. They aren't elders, they're old. There's a big difference. And you honor family. When I tell somebody on my faculty, I can't come to the meeting because I've got family obligations, they say, well, is there any way you can reschedule that? Can we talk? Let's figure something out here. I say that to Indian people, and they say, oh, I'm sorry. That's okay, great. Go to the family things. It's true, isn't it? It's true. That's real. That's not romantic or something. It's actually true. And you go on and on. And then you get into stuff that aren't just, not just, but aren't sort of things that come into play in sort of ordinary relationships. There are your dances and so on. Now, not all tribes do this, but many tribes among you are some who have world renewal ceremonies. And what they are your traditional dances where you express your personal obligations to make the natural world better and the human world better. Now, I'm sorry, white people don't have dances like that, where you lay on yourselves responsibility for making things better, things that are beyond your power, things that are frustrating if you're really going to take that on. But you have dances that do that, and dances that are done with such care and precision and taking time away from work. That's big stuff. And then there's language. How can anybody take on the challenge of trying to save a language in these days of all the communications we have and all the exciting stuff for young people that come in, whether it's sports or music or everything else, and they don't have time for the languages? Who would take on anything like that, trying to save a language? Well, nearly every tribe has. And it's recent. It's in the last 25 years where you've had specific language programs. That's so admirable. That shows so clearly where your values are, that you're trying to save the languages. And who knows if you can do it? I don't have a position on a view, an understanding on whether you can do it. I think there's a lot you can do. I think that a lot can be done. I don't know. I mean, there are differences between having many people who are fluent in the language and, on the other hand, having many people who know songs and a lot of values and phrases that can be expressed in the language but come short of being fluent. There's a difference between those two things. But whatever it is, you're trying to do that. Now, one thing I love about tribal leaders and tribal members, tribal adults, is that you are extremely conservative on these issues. You get very, very concerned, angry, worried about just this subject, about all this stuff coming in. And I admire that. It may be that the circumstances are better than your fears are based on, and that some of these young people, in fact, when they start to get to be 21 and 22, start to say, hey, wait a minute, I've got something really valuable here in my tribe's traditions. And you see people coming back. And so you see young people up through their mid-teens at least and so on who are clearly being lured away by these other things, but many of whom will come back. So that, to me, I see pretty much of that, but I want you to be concerned about that, because that's one thing that makes them come back, is seeing their parents and people they admire and their family being concerned about it and saying, look, you're in danger of living a life without being a traditional, without following the culture of your tribe, which is a beautiful and valuable thing. And that can make a difference with these young people, and it is because you are so conservative about it. But I'm not trying to predict anything. I'm just saying that this is the ultimate question. I think your question, in a way, was, should we be concerned about this? And I think you are, and the gentleman asked the question, and I am on your behalf, and all of us are, and we ought to be. But the main thing is, at least this: be very clear at how valuable what you have is. It's valuable to you, and it's valuable to everybody else. And I'll tell you right now, you've got Aldo Leopold's land ethic. And from the majority side, that's the strongest statement on environmental values there is, really, is his land ethic. And it's good, and he did a good job. It's nothing next to what you see in the land. It really isn't. Yours is much more layered. I realized that when I did Messages from Frank's Landing. I had a moment when I finally said to myself, Billy Frank is, and I'm going to use Billy's phrase, a goddamn genius. He is. He is a genius. And he can explain the Indian worldview and how he cares about the land in a way that hits it on that exactly right, and that is much deeper than Aldo Leopold, much deeper. And the book ends actually with some things that Billy said on that subject. So certainly believe in what you have, and you know you love the land more, and the awareness of look, the majority society, 50% doesn't believe that global warming both exists and is partly caused by the majority society. In the United States of America, that's what the split is, about 50-50. In Indian country, it's 98-2. And people say, excuse me, there's a doubt about this? Because you know the land, and you know that your river's down, and you know that your forests are starting to fray, and you can see it, and you know the temperatures are changing, and that the storm activity has changed. You know that. And you have no doubt about that. And that's because of your worldview about your connection to the land and how much you care about it. And some of it is pragmatic, in that hunting and fishing depends upon having really good, solid animal populations, and that traditionally this was your food. And so, yes, you had to really value the land highly. And you always have, but it does go beyond that. You're part of the land. You're part of the natural world. You know, Billy would say, my brothers and sisters, the eagles and the hawks. And you believe that. And many other things that go along with that. So you have so much to offer. And you don't really go out that often, and it's hard to do. I'm not even saying you should do, but it's hard to go out and say that. I wish more of us supported that, frankly, and spoke out. I think that would be of some use. But I have some faith in your young people, and we'll see. It's rough. And you know, the way the computer, you know, for us who have been around a while, the computer thing and technological stuff has just come on so fast. And these young kids get hit with it right from the beginning. So, and we haven't been. We weren't from the beginning. We know how strong it is, but for these kids, it becomes organic with them. And those are issues. But let me tell you, let me just finish off and say, your cultures are better than any goddamn technological stuff white people bring along. See you later. Oh, man.
Okay. Thank you very much. And we'll sort of segue from the presentation part to the gifting part. And so we have several students from the Res-Based program who are come forward and do some gifting to various people here. So as you come on up, just come on up. And while they're coming up, I just want to mention, I just distributed the case for next time. On December 5th, we'll be meeting here, and we'll be hearing from Dan Napoli, who's a member of the Gila River Tribe, talking about water issues with the Gila River Band. And so if you would like to come, you're welcome to come. We always invite guests to come and be a part of what we're doing. That's at 1:30 Saturday, December 5th, here at the Longhouse. This is Vince Cook, the Chair of Student Governance.
Thanks, Cindy. Thank you, Charles. Really appreciate that. And I think Billy Frank would be proud the way you ended that. Kind of almost said in his words. So really appreciate you coming. I do want to thank the Student Government Council for providing the funds for having him come, and Hank, we're also honored to have you here along with Willie and other elected officials from other tribes and our local tribe here as well. So we appreciate it, Kleko, Kleko. And Mike Graham, sorry I called you Charles earlier, but you're wearing a jacket just like him. And I put my glasses on now, so I won't be referring to you as Charles. As we get older, we have a hard time with those types of things. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Jeremiah George. We'd like to honor a couple people. He's going to sing a song, and I'd like to have Willie come up and Hank Adams, our 2 elected officials from Yakima. Where did Cindy go? Who else am I missing? Charles, our main guy, Charles Wilkinson. If we can have you come up here, Charles, we'd like to sing a song and honor you folks for all the stuff that you do. So, Nugent Counts and Jim Peters, and Mike would like to have you come up as well from the Fish Commission. And Jeremiah is the Vice President of Student Governance, so thank you, Jeremiah. Appreciate it.
To be able to blanket you with the few blankets that we have, we ask that you take maybe 2 or 3 steps forward so the blankets can get behind you. We have some blankets that we have from Squaxin, from our hosting of the canoe journey. These have some traditional elements. They have our logo of the tribe, and so we wanted to blanket Charles Wilkinson. We appreciate you coming and all the work that you're doing and connections that you're maintaining. And we also have a cedar rope necklace here with some beadwork at the end. So, and next we have Hank Adams. We also have one of these necklaces here to present. And we thank you for coming today and quizzing him a little bit. that was some good back and forth between you guys. Appreciate that. And Willie, of course, we want to provide you with a blanket to say thank you for your role that you're continuing on. Yeah, we have necklaces here for our other representatives, and we raise our hands to everybody and say that we really cannot thank you enough and cannot say that we appreciate the work that you're all doing and continuing the ways of our people and leading us in the good way. And I'm going to share a song here just in recognition. Of course, we have Jim Peters, our local leadership here from Squaxin. We have a necklace here for you too. And again, we raise our hands to you on behalf of RCBD, Reservation-Based program. So this is just a quick blessing song in recognition of the gifts. We are missing Chehalis Tribal Council member from Chehalis site. Actually, one of my relatives from my Pickernell side and the Quinault territory. appreciate it. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for being here. Charles, thank you very much for agreeing to come to Evergreen for the reservation-based program. Cindy, I forgot to thank you for the lunch you provided and the snacks, so kliko, kliko. People want to hang around. The Yakima folks have a gifting they want to do as well.
I just want to take a minute or two here. First of all, I want to thank I believe it's the Muckleshoot Charitable Foundation and also others for providing the meal. As they say, one of the greatest things you can do for a person is to invite them into your home and give them something to eat, because in our belief, that's a big medicine to ourselves. And so 20 years ago, I came here. I was as the chief of police for the Yakima Nation when this home was dedicated. And at that time, I was just beginning to learn, as you heard from, on the Yakima Reservation, we affectionately called him Chaz. So there's a history behind that, Doctor. So we're glad to be able to have Chaz come here. But in 1974, when the decision was handed down, I began my work in tribal law enforcement. And as one of the things that we know about sovereignty is the ability to make and enforce our own laws. And as Hank indicated on the map that was up earlier, there was also another nation that was missing on that map, and that was the Yakima Nation. Because U.S. versus Washington was decided in the Western Federal District of Washington. And so our involvement, because of our treaty areas, extend not only along the Columbia River, but in other areas, as we're also involved in the culverts case that you heard about. And so back in '74, that was a very big victory for us. But to you young people, you students, there's also a previous case called US v. Oregon that dovetails. And the judge named was Bologna, and that's Italian, but that was his name. And that US v. Oregon and US v. Washington. And the Yakama Nation is the only tribe that is named in both cases. And that's because of our treaty territory. And so as Chaz had indicated, the Quinaults gave a very compelling testimony regarding their self-regulatory status. So too was the Yakama Nation, and we were the two tribes that were in the decision recognized as self-regulatory, Quinault and Yakama. So that's the reason that we came today. I have our chairman of our Fish and Wildlife Committee here, Mr. Jerry Lewis, has worked all his career in fisheries. And today we're seeing historic returns up the Columbia River. And as the doctor had indicated, because of our ability, our staff, our biologists, our fisheries, were able to make improvements. You heard about the concern of lamprey, which is a big part of our food system. And so we're very grateful to come back here after 20 years and to listen to what I call, one of these gentlemen that worked for us. You heard about Ralph, Professor Johnson and Al Zients and others. These were the teachers when I was at the University of Washington. I took classes under these gentlemen. And certainly Dr. Wilkinson is part of that, along with all of our attorneys. And so we're very grateful that Evergreen State College can host this type of event, especially to the young people, as you study and learn, because these are the things that our elders impressed upon us, that you have to know that history. And that very last question about culture and language. You heard from Dr. Wilkinson say that when our people spoke in our own language, that Judge Bolt, he took that to heart. And that's a testimony to what our elders tell us. Maintain your language, maintain your identity, because that's what makes us unique, and that's what makes our connection to this ground, to our mother here, and all the natural resources. So on behalf of the Yakama Nation, I appreciate being here. And at this time, I'd like to have, as our elder would say, God damn it, Chaz, get up here. And I would just like to call upon Kalula. Not only is he the chairman of our Fish and Wildlife Committee, but he's also a traditional and spiritual leader among our people. And as we heard the song, on behalf of this day, on behalf of our brother here, and behalf of the continuing effort of Evergreen State College to educate our young people, to say a few words and maybe close out in our traditional manner, because when we come to this event, we all come with one heart, with one mind, one thought, and we're all related in one way or another, because our mother that takes care of us, the earth. So we have these concerns that we pray for every day. So just want to make that request to my brother here, and I will conclude. Klai Kushnai.
In Minanaimoma, in Minwanikshawsh, Kalula. As I stated earlier, my Indian name is Kalula. As my brother had spoken, Yellowash, he spoke of my time working within fisheries. I spent 20 years within our fisheries program before I became a tribal council member. And when I became a tribal council member, they stuck me on the Fish and Wildlife Committee, where I've been since my inception on the tribal council. I also have other duties as assigned. I'm the assistant secretary to our executive board, and so I have many duties within my work as a councilman. And one of the other duties that Yellowash had mentioned, being a religious leader of the Topnish Creek Longhouse there in White Swan, which I had succeeded my father-in-law, who was the religious leader of that home. And when his health began to fail, I helped him as best I could within that role. And when he passed away, they asked if I would retain that position. And so, in essence, I have two jobs that I do, one as a tribal councilman and one as a religious leader. And when we have people pass away, a lot of times I conduct the funeral services on behalf of our people. Today we traveled this way, and this morning there was a funeral at home. It's a never-ending, it seems to be a never-ending process. Every week we seem to be losing people. We are up to almost 11,000 people within our reservation, and we seem to be losing 2 to 3 a week. And we have people that are in the hospitals today. One of them is my nephew, whom we helped raise as a young man, so he's considered a son to I and my wife. But we made that commitment to be here today, so we traveled this morning to be here to listen to the comments spoken of the Bolt decision and the memory of the man that was spoken today. A great friend indeed to all members, not only here on the west side, but also on the east side. And it was very wonderful to listen to him speak, because he spoke from the heart, as it should be. But I'm very appreciative to this man for what he had said about USV Washington, USV Oregon, because it is coming up within our Kritvik tribes that we need to renew that USV Oregon. And the tribes are preparing themselves for that, along with the Columbia River Treaty. We also have what they call the Accords, of which the Nez Perce tribe is not a party of. There are many things that are also on the table. The Pacific Salmon Treaty is one of them. And the biggest issue, I believe, is the climate change. These are all confronting each and every one of us as tribal members, as tribes. And so we face these each and every day, much like our elders did in the past. We must confront these head on, because that is the way we are as Indian people. And so, as my brother had spoken, we are going to sing a song on behalf of this day, on behalf of what Tamanawatla has provided for each and every one of us, the wonderful meal that we shared, and the friendships that we still continue on, the new and the old. This song that we're going to sing comes from an area called Mulmul in our lands. It's Fort Simcoe area up there where the cavalry had a fort. And they gathered our people there. And if our people had been found guilty of doing wrong, they hung our people in an oak tree up there. And a lot of times they were done wrong. They were found guilty for small infractions, but yet they were hung. And they tried to hang one of our chiefs, and they could not do it. The rope broke or something would happen. And so he rode away on the horse, and he spoke to the people that were there, and he sang this song. And today this song is still carried by our people. So with that, I know my brother will join me within this song. Nai.
together in this home. 20 years ago, there were many words, good words that were spoken by a lot of people. You look around and you see the empty places. Some of those people are gone today, but yet their teachings are still with us. And they talked about the sacrifice of these logs and all the materials that gave up its life, as all of our foods does. They give up its life for you and I. And in this song, it talks about that sacrifice. And it's a warrior song. We call it a treaty song because of the time that it came out. And this man here, our brother, is a warrior that, like others, took up that fight. He could have followed another road. He could have done something else with his knowledge and with his expertise, but yet he recognized the need, and he came and he helped our elders, and he helped the others to take care of the things that have been promised to you and I through these treaties. And that fight goes on today. So I'm grateful that the students here have the opportunity to listen to this man, and as he relates, because he was there right at the front along with our others. And so as this day is designated, but it doesn't stop here, and as he said, we're really encouraged by our young people, and we're proud of our young people, and that this effort to our way of life will never leave us. The things that we're supposed to take care of. So I just want to express that again on behalf of this day and on behalf of our brother here, Kali Krishnai.